Okay, we're going to continue the next lesson. So, tuples, an introduction to tuples. So, what are tuples? A tuple is essentially a list that uses parentheses instead of brackets. However, tuples are different from lists in the sense that they aren't able to be changed after you have created it. So, this can be useful for when you know you won't change something after you created it. And examples of tuples, let me go on to Replit real quick. So tuple name, and I just created it with apples, oranges, and bananas, similar to a shopping list. But let's say I know that I won't change my mind. So I print it, you can see that it comes out as apples, oranges, and bananas, very similar to a list, except for you can't use any of the commands like add or remove or replace anything. Okay, going back, we have maps. Maps in Python. So maps are also known as dictionary or dict in Python, and it is quite similar to lists and tuples. However, maps have a key and a corresponding value to each key. This is useful because it makes finding things and matching one key with one value much more efficient than if you were to do it with lists. Maps are created with braces, and key and values are separated by colons. Also, like lists, maps are manipulative. So maps are used when you want to have a pair of values that are connected to each other. Like, for example, a name and information about the person. So a name and a phone number, or a name and a grade, or a name and a test score. So it's so much better for storing information that way, or like a name and an address. So going back to the example that I was sharing, here I typed it, you can see I made a map called school info and I put Kate, this is the key, then the value would be 9th grade. As you can see, there's a colon separating it. And then you see Jack in 10th grade. So I printed it and it's prints similar to a list with all the notation there, but you can call a specific value by using keys. So if I want to know like what grade a specific person was in, I could call it saying Kate, and then it would show you the grade. So that's on the next slide, but it's so much easier for calling information if you don't need to know the index number to call it. So manipulating maps. To get to the value of a specific key from a map, you use print. That's to print it out in the console, map name, and then key name. So you can see there are normal brackets around key name, and it has to be in a string or just basically whatever the key is. So to delete a value in a map, you use del map name key name. To replace a value in a map, you use map name key name equals new value. So that basically replaces whatever the value was before. However, Python doesn't understand the concept of joining maps together, so we can't add one map to another. So like lists, how we could add one list to another, in this case, we can't. So going back to the Replit, if I wanted to, for example, know what grade Jack was in, I could do print school info brackets, and then I call the key of Jack. And you can see he's in 10th grade. If I wanted to call Kate, I could do print school info, remember the string, and Kate, and you can see she's in 9th grade. Let's say Jack transferred out of the school. So you don't want Jack anymore, and you would do del school info Jack. And then let's try printing the map again after that so you could see how it changed. And you can see only Kate is left. There's no more Jack. Jack's all gone from the map. Then we can try it with, let's say he transferred back. So then you would do school info Jack equals grade. And you can try printing a list again after that. And he's back. So you basically add items into maps by the same way you replace items. If I wanted to say 10th grade was an error and I want to replace that, so he's actually in 11th grade. Okay, I have to print it again. And you can see he's in 11th grade now. So it's so much easier to change items. Like lists, you have to use specific commands like add or append basically. And maps, you just simply put the key and then you put the value in. So it's the same for replacing and adding. And then if I wanted to add this into a string, if, for example, you wanted to output to the user, this student's grade is, you could also do this with substitution, but I'm just doing this in a different way. If I set a variable to Jack's grade equals Jack. This is how you call items from maps. You see this variable basically contains what grade he's in, the value in the map, which would be, in this case, 11th grade over here. And then I can put in Jack's grade. And then you can see this student's grade is 11th grade. So this is how you output things back to the user and how you make a more user-friendly program. Instead of just putting random values, you can add context, such as adding the sentence here before. So you can like put values into a variable over here. And then if you wanted to make this even more complicated, you could ask for user input to ask which name the user wanted to look up. So for example, they didn't want to look up Jack, they wanted to look up Kate instead. So you would put an input function here. I can separate this. You would make a variable for the user input. So what student do you want to look up? That would allow the user to type in what student they want. And instead of having a string here, you can make it the variable to make your program even more complicated. So I want to put in Kate. And then it shows me this student's grade is 9th grade. So this is how you make like a little more complicated programs if you followed that at all. So instead of just putting in strings or things set into the program, you can use input functions and variables for that input. Okay, so going back to the lesson, here is some practice. So create your contact book and use a map with the person's name as the key and the phone number as the value. So you want to do two things. You want to print out the map, and then you want to print out a specific value by using its key. And if you want, you can also play with subtracting and changing values of the map. And then if you want to do an even more complicated version of it, you can try and do what I did while asking for user input to look up people's names and printing out their phone numbers. So moving on now, if statements, which is an introduction to conditions. So an if statement consists of the if keyword, a colon after the condition, and then the lines following the colon must be indented in a block. Conditions that are statements are statements that will execute based on the value of the expression. For example, if something is greater than 5, or if something is true or false, you will execute a specific statement. So this will also work for strings, like if something is equal to the string of hello, or if something is equal to the string of yes or no, which is an easy way to answer yes or no questions by our users. So I can show you an example here on the Replit, or never mind, there's an example here. Number equals 25. If number is greater than 20, then you can see the content is that it's indented, so that's the part of code that's going to run. It prints your number is very big, number equals number minus 10, and then if number is greater than 20 still, then you can see the indented code again. For that specific if statement is print, your number is still very big, and then number equals number minus 10. And then at the end, it prints the number. So we group statements together into blocks because they need to be run together. Each line of code within a block should have the same amount of indents before it. So I can show you an example that's running the code, so it might be easier to understand. Okay, so here I can recreate that number equals 25 if number is less than, or let's say greater than 20, and you see the colon, and it automatically indents it for us in Replit, which is very nice. We could do print so just looking at this first part of code, it prints your number is very big. But then if I add the part of code that changes it, number equals number minus 10. And then if I do the second if statement, just copy the code from before. And you can see it doesn't print it the second time because we subtracted 10 from the number. So now the number then, if we wanted to see what the number was, we could do print number. And the number is now 15, which is not bigger than 20. So the second part of the code will not run. We can also do this using loops, but that would be a more complicated way. If you want me to show you, I can, because it's actually easier to use, but this is just like easier to understand logic-wise. Okay. So using loops, you would essentially make one if statement and it would just keep running that if statement over and over, subtracting if it was greater than 20. So you wouldn't have the second block of code over here. So going back to the presentation, we have symbols for conditions, helps us compare things. So these symbols are called operators, and you could essentially use them in if statements to like essentially express what you want to do. So this is equal to, this is not equal to, this is greater than, and then this little arrow is less than, the arrow and then the equal sign is greater than or equal to, and then the arrow facing the other way, and then the equal sign is less than or equal to. So we don't use one singular equal sign because that's the same as defining a variable, and in this case we're trying to compare two things, so that's why we use double equal sign. So if you got these down, if you want, I can test all of them. For example, if I change here, if number is equal to 20, it wouldn't print anything because the number is 25. I change it to 20, then it would print your number is very big. But let's say if we test out the not equal to operator, it says if your number is not equal to 20, it prints your number is very big. So 25 is not equal to 20, and therefore my number is very big. If you could try the number is less than 20, and it doesn't print anything because 25 is not less than 20. Less than or equal to, nothing again. Then we do greater than or equal to. And you can see the number is very big because 25 is greater than or equal to 20. We finished around with like 5 minutes to spare. So if you have any other questions about maps or what we went over today for if statements, you can also like put if statements in. You can use if statements for many different things.